So the Miami Heat is the most disrespected franchise there is right now. Nobody's talking about the Miami Heat.
We had enough. Next year, we will have enough, and we're going to be right back in the same situation, and we're going to get it done.
They hate when you elevate. Freaking Butler puts it in the floor. They feel like I'm floating. I'm lost in the moment. They hate when you elevate. Catch up. They hate when you elevate. As DeMartin fakes it out.
This Miami Heat turnaround cannot be real. From an 8th seed barely surviving the NBA play-in tournament to NBA Finals? What? About 2 months ago, at the end of March, Heat head coach Erik Spoelstra, after a tough late season loss to the New York Knicks, said, quote, "Our guys have been embracing the struggle. There hasn't been anything easy about the season. Sometimes seasons go like that." The Miami Heat have a winning culture with a championship mindset, but hearing words like that from the head coach who's been with the franchise for a decade plus came across as really deflated and almost as if all the spirit in the franchise was zapped. The Heat fell to the 7th seed in the East following that loss after they had multiple chances in March to vault up to the 4th or 5th seed ahead of the Knicks and Nets. But quite frankly, that's been the story of who the Miami Heat were all regular season, which is precisely what makes their ongoing deep playoff run so wild to think about. All season long, the Heat were a middle-of-the-pack team, and I'm being generous when I say that. They were 25th in offense, their net rating of minus 0.5 was worse than a lot of teams who didn't even make the playoffs, and they shot the 10th most three-pointers in the league while being just 26th in makes. And something that's being lost in all of this, by Game 4 of their first round series against the Milwaukee Bucks, the Heat were missing their second highest scorer and arguably their second most valuable offensive player in Tyler Hero. As much as the numbers might indicate that the Heat winning in the first round over the Bucks was a fluke, they flat out dominated through 5 games. The same team with a top 5 defense in the NBA, and did it looking like the deepest team in the entire league. But the shocking part is that the Heat, again, versus a top 5 defense, scored 119 points per 100 possessions, and they did it having arguably just one guy who can consistently create his own offense in Jimmy Butler. More on that later. Oh, and after shooting just 34% from three-point range all year long, the Heat somehow shot a scorching 45% from downtown through those 5 games. Believe me, I kept saying to myself, there's no way they'll keep this up, but they indeed have kept it up. I mean, there were anomalies all across the board. The Heat shot a better field goal percentage from every area of the floor. Duncan Robinson, who went from playing only 16.4 minutes a night before the playoffs and getting hit with DNPs after DNPs, played in every game of the series and shot nearly 74% from the three-point line. Simply the most improbable sustained performance by an 8th seed we'll ever see. Heck, even a 1st or 2nd seed hasn't done something quite like that. And I get it. Giannis hurt his back and it likely played a role in his performance. But with how the Heat were playing, forget about trying to beat them. And if there was even the slightest bit of doubt that playoff Jimmy isn't a real thing, he left zero doubts in anyone's mind. Don't overthink it. Jimmy Buckets has reannounced himself as one of the definitive top 10 players in the NBA, at least. The man thoroughly dominated the Bucks and was by far the best player in the series, even over a guy in Giannis, whom many have seated firmly on the throne of the best player in the world. I thought this to myself even before Reggie Miller uttered it on live television.
I've got to say, this may be the greatest playoff performance by any Heat player.
But I didn't want to believe it because of how storied the Miami Heat's franchise is. But man, Reggie Miller is a Hall of Famer, one of the greatest shooters in NBA history. He might just be right. The only other performance that came to mind that I thought were arguably either just as good or better than Jimmy Butler's 56-point outburst against the Bucks are Dwayne Wade's 46 points against the Celtics in the 2010 playoffs, LeBron's 49 points against the Brooklyn Nets in the 2014 playoffs. And the most notable Miami Heat performance of them all, LeBron's 45-point legendary Game 6 performance against the Boston Celtics in 2012. But man, I'll leave all the debating for you guys. How Jimmy Butler made the All-NBA second team, but was not selected as an All-Star is a mystery. Jimmy gave buckets to any all-defensive caliber defender Milwaukee threw his way, including Jrue Holiday, who's arguably the best perimeter defender in all the NBA. In the series, Jimmy went from scoring 23 points in the regular season to increasing his scoring average by nearly 15 points a night and shooting more efficiently from three-point range, the restricted area, and the paint. Arguably, the most telling stat of Jimmy's series performance is his 53.4% field goal percentage on his jump shots after shooting 45.9% on jumpers during the regular season. He basically morphed into an MJ-level player offensively while maintaining his sound play on the defensive side on the other end. He followed up his 56-point Game 4 with a 42-point Game 5, perhaps the best back-to-back performances in recent NBA history. And knowing who the Heat were in the regular season to what they became, literally overnight, against the Milwaukee Bucks, was all this team needed. Literally all the fuel they needed to go out there and play with the swagger of a team who can win the championship this year. They walked into Madison Square Garden in Game 1 of the East semifinals with the body language of a team who was at the top of the standing all year. I couldn't recognize this team as an 8th seed, and their quick 3-1 lead over the Knicks was indicative of that. Just because Miami captured my and a lot of other folks' respect, there was still a ton of doubt out there about this team. In fact, ESPN gave the Heat just a 3% chance of winning in the Eastern Conference Finals against the Boston Celtics entering the series. But when the Heat went into Boston in both games 1 and 2 and straight up showed the world just what they're genuinely about, now beating Milwaukee was lucky, according to most people, but the Heat just doubled down and beat the Boston Celtics, beating the top 2 seeds in their conference as an 8th seed en route to an NBA Finals. The same way the Heat beat both Boston and Milwaukee, 2 of the top 3 seeds in the East, as an underdog 5th seed in the 2020 bubble. The Heat have been there and done that. Throw the 8th seed talk and the record out of the window. The playoffs are a different animal. The Heat stormed into Boston in this year's East Finals with next to no chance of walking away victorious in this series, according to all the analytics. But this Jimmy Butler quote is a perfect reflection of how the Heat comfortably took both games on the road. But it's just competition. I do respect him though. He's a big part of what they try to do. He switches, he can shoot the ball. I just don't know if I'm the best person to talk to. While Grant Williams' quote-unquote poking the bear may have been enough to completely dig the Celtics in for good, you can't help but credit Miami's defense led by Jimmy Butler throughout crunch time. They trapped Jason Tatum and got the ball out of his hands as soon as he tried making his move, and it often led to Tatum looking out of sorts and coughing up the ball, and with Jaylen Brown struggling all game. And outside of Jimmy Butler's sound D on Tatum and his tough shot making on offense, what's apparent to me is that the Heat had a decided coaching advantage over the young Boston head coach Joe Mazzulla, who made some questionable decisions in the Philly series too, albeit. But Philly is no Miami when it comes to execution down the stretch. And another truth, Eric Spoelstra hasn't gotten the credit he deserved because he had D Wade for so many years, then LeBron and Chris Bosh. But look at him now, proving that he's been the best coach in the entire postseason with what he's done with key role players like Caleb Martin, who scored 25 off the bench in Game 2 versus the Celtics, his performance in Game 4 when he shot 6 for 6 in the first half, which is tied for the second most makes without a miss and a half by a Heat player over the last 25 postseasons. How about another unsung hero, Gabe Vincent, having scoring outbursts as he had in Game 3 versus the Celtics when he went for 29 points and hit 6 3-pointers. It's why the Miami Heat continue to pull things off we thought we'd never see by a team that barely squeezed into the playoffs. A 46-point third quarter in Game 1 versus Boston is a testament to the depth of this team. 46 points, a franchise record. The same franchise that had Wade and LeBron in their prime, snipers like Ray Allen, Shane Battier, Mario Chalmers, Mike Miller, but even they couldn't pull off that level feat. What an incredibly hard-nosed team that Miami had become from top to bottom. One night it's Martin, another night it's Max Struss going off, other times I look up and it's Gabe Vincent hitting tough shots. It's the kind of kinship from top to bottom in the Heat culture that's been the biggest reason for Miami's success in the post-D Wade era with Jimmy Butler taking the keys to the franchise. And speaking of, who would have thought when Jimmy signed with the Heat in the summer of 2019 that he'd lift this franchise to an NBA Finals and 3 conference finals appearances? They said Jimmy messed up by leaving Philly, and winning a ring would perhaps leave him standing alone in a special place in Miami's franchise history. And this time, he has all the making of a championship all around him. Drop your predictions for this year's NBA Finals in the comments below.